All right, guys, welcome, Alan Stein. Welcome to have you here.
Oh man, it's so great to be with you.
Yeah. So, Alan, well, what a story. I just did your intro, of course, right before we came on here, and you've worked with some of the greatest NBA legends of the last, couple of decades. How did all of this start for you? Because you're still a young guy to have this kind of resume, I feel like.
Well, I guess young is relative. I just turned 47 a couple weeks ago, so I'm knocking on the door of 50 years old, which
Sure.
with my optimism puts me about halfway through my life. So
I'm with
I'm
you.
just about at halftime, so I'm good with that.
Mhm.
I think what's most important is the fact that I fell in love with the game of basketball when I was 5 years old. My parents signed me up for my first recreation basketball experience when I was in kindergarten. And I'm so grateful that here, 4 decades plus, later, basketball is still a major driving force and passion in my life, and I'm thankful that I've been able to build a life and make a living doing something that I love to do. And along my basketball journey, I was giving what I still consider to this day the single best piece of advice I've ever received, and that was from a middle school coach who said the key to high performance, the key to achievement, the key to success, the key to fulfillment is finding what it is that you love and finding what it is that you're pretty good at, and then find where those two things intersect. And that
Mhm.
point of intersection will be your strength zone. And the more time you can dedicate to working on your craft within your strength zone, the more likely it is that you'll have those outcomes that I just mentioned. And I'm
Got
thankful
it.
that I've been able to stay true to that intersection throughout my career. Now, it's important to note that intersection will move and it'll iterate as you get older, because you'll uncover and develop new passions, and you'll uncover and develop new talents and skills. So, for the first third of my life, that intersection was as a basketball player. The next
Uh,
third of my life, that intersection was as a basketball performance coach. And now in the current form, it's as a corporate keynote speaker and author. But it still holds true of doing things I'm passionate about and things that I have a natural affinity for.
Yeah, I think that's so the two things in there that stand out to me. One is, what are you pretty good at, right? What are you solid at? And then what do you love? What lights you up? I think too many times we lean into either one of those directions without them crossing over, right? So I'm just going to do what I love. And it's like, well, you're not that great at it sometimes, right? And I'm thinking of like the singer on American Idol that like shouldn't be there, right? It's like, dude, someone's got to tell you like you might love this, but it's not really your path, right? And then on the flip side, I'm really, really great at this, but I don't love it equals lack of fulfillment, even if the stats are good, right?
Absolutely. That's such an insightful direction for this to go. The way I look at it is, if you really love something, but maybe you don't have a tremendous amount of talent in it, you can still pursue it as a hobby. It can still be
Right.
something that you do on the side. I mean, if it's something that truly lights you up and fills your bucket, I encourage folks to do it. But it's probably not the area that you'll be able to make the biggest impact or the biggest contribution to those around you. It might not even be the area that's best for your primary vocation, but there's nothing wrong with pursuing things that maybe you lack a little talent. On the other end, that's the one where I think we really need to be careful, is doing things that we feel obligated to do or that other people tell us we should do. A perfect example of this is the kid that's 6'5" in middle school, and his parents make him play basketball even though
Right.
he doesn't like basketball. But they're basically saying, look, you've been given the gift of height. That's kind of important in basketball. You need to play. And while those parents are certainly very well intentioned, and it's never, my direction to try to criticize or judge anybody else, but I just think as human beings, we have to be very careful about pursuing things that we don't enjoy. And I also, want to make note that this doesn't mean that every moment of every day is puppy dogs and ice cream. I mean,
Sure.
occasionally there are things that we have to do, even within our strength zone, that might not be our favorite thing to do, or portions of our work or craft that maybe don't necessarily light us up the way the rest of it does. But I'm just talking kind of in broad and in general.
No, I get it. And we've talked before about, yeah, having gifts and then having vehicles, right? And it's like you certainly want to be in kind of your genius zone, or for you, like this crossover zone as often as you can. But there's also stuff you do to pay the bills along the way, right? Or things that we just need to do. So tell me more about your journey though. So you're growing up, you're playing basketball, you're getting some good advice on kind of maybe what direction to point in. How does this lead to eventually working with some of the biggest sports stars we've ever heard of, you know?
Well, right before I answer that, and I promise that I
Yes,
will get back
of
to that,
course,
there's
of
one more
course.
thing I want to say on this strength zone concept.
Please, yeah.
That is one of the ways that we figure out what we're passionate about and what we're good at is through good old fashioned trial and error.
Yeah.
So I'm all about, especially for younger folks. Now, whether you consider younger folks to be teenagers, I still consider younger folks in their 20s and early 30s, but there's nothing wrong with trying different things, trying as many different things as you can, because I do believe that the ability to cross something off of the list and say either I don't like that or I'm not very good at that is just as valuable as finding what it is that you do like. In fact, the more things you can cross off the list, the more likely you are to actually find the thing that's going to hit the target. So, as a parent of 3 kids, I've constantly encouraged my children to try a variety of different sports and activities and so forth, because I want them to kind of get a feel for it. I was very fortunate that I kind of found my strength zone relatively early. But even within that, through the last 47 years of my life, I still continue to find things that excite me and find new things that I can actually develop a skill set in. So I just want to make sure folks know that if you're listening to this and you don't necessarily know where your strength zone is, that is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that means you're normal. That's part of the human condition. I encourage you to try a bunch of things and make a bunch of new relationships, read a bunch of new books, listen to a bunch of new podcasts so you can start to figure some of that stuff out.
Yeah, agreed completely. And I sort of feel like, as long as you're learning, then it's never a failure, right? So and in fact, I think we get so hung up on having the proper outcome. Like, let's just say people starting companies as an example, where it's like, no, I just want to hang on to this idea, even though I may not love it, and even though it may not be viable, because to admit defeat is a failure somehow. And it's like, nah, man, maybe you gave it your best shot. It's not for you. It's not sticking. It's not aligning. And the best thing you can do is learn from it, move on, and like you're saying, apply that, right, to better
Yeah.
narrow down what's going to be your niche.
Well, one of the things I see all the time propagated on social media and even on, Nike t-shirts is this concept of don't quit, never quit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can appreciate the overarching sentiment of that, because I believe
Yeah.
the people that say that actually mean, look, when things get a little bit tough, you still got to push through it. And I support
Right.
that sentiment completely.
Of course.
I just am very careful about using absolute. So when someone says never quit, well, there's a lot of things that you actually need to quit, and if you don't quit them, they're going to distract you and take you away from the things that you should be doing. So anytime any of us uncover something in our life that is not serving us, that is not moving us towards the person we're striving to become, that is not empowering us to make a contribution to those things around us, we should absolutely consider quitting those things. So, all of these things, I think, kind of mesh together. And where this actually leads to more of my story is I didn't have any clue what I wanted to do when I was entering college. I played basketball at Elon University down in North Carolina. I knew that I wanted to do something around the game of basketball. I also knew that I didn't have what it took to be a professional player. So we could cross that one off the list. The passion was there. The talent wasn't there to play at that level. And at that time, as I was entering college, the only thing I could think of was to be a teacher and to be a coach. And both of my parents were elementary educators for their entire careers, found a tremendous amount of fulfillment and joy as teachers. So I just figured that's what I should pursue. I'll be a teacher and then I can coach. And as I got into that at Elon, I started to realize that my passion swayed heavily towards the coaching part, not so much the teaching part. And one of the things that I learned from my parents was teaching is one of several different vocations, but teaching is a vocation that you can't go through the motions and you can't mail it in. You owe it to the students that you're working with to be all in, mind, body, and soul. You need to be there to give them 100%. And I realized that I just didn't have the love to do that. And, I figured that out during my student teaching and realized this is not for me. And thankfully, I got so much clarity in that moment that this is not for me, that I quickly changed my major to sport management, which has served me really well in my career because it combined exercise physiology with business. And that's ultimately what I did for the first 20 years of my career. I was a basketball performance coach, but I ran my own business. I was self-employed, had my own training company. So that major actually was perfect for what I ended up doing. But as soon as I was able to course correct and kind of get out of the teaching path, because that wasn't what I was called to do, and switch and shift that over to the basketball performance side, then things really started to rock and roll. And not only was I able to, perform at a higher level and make a bigger impact, but I just enjoyed it so much
Oh
more. And
yeah.
I can't stress enough how important joy and fulfillment is to our ability to perform at a high level and to do good work. I mean, I'm not just preaching to be Pollyanna and,
Mhm.
oh, just be mediocre in life, but at least you're having fun. No, I actually believe that fulfillment and joy is the impetus that actually creates high performance and success and achievement. It's not the other way around.
I agree. So all of a sudden you find yourself, you've got the degree, you're aligned with where you want to go. You're focusing on sports management now. I'm guessing you're 22 or 23 years old. Where do you bounce out of North Carolina and Elon from? Where do you land from there?
I moved back to where I currently live now, which is the same place that I've grown up, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. I'm in the suburbs of Maryland, about 30 minutes north of Washington, D.C. So outside of my 4.5 years in college, I've lived here my entire life. And I moved back here to pursue being a basketball strength and conditioning coach. There was a guy here that was several years older than I was, and he was training several NBA players. He had a really tight relationship with the folks over at Georgetown, and he had trained a lot of Georgetown's best players, starting with Alonzo Mourning. So, I at the time figured the best way for me to pursue that path, which was the path I wanted to be on, was to learn from someone who had already blazed that trail. So
For sure.
I moved back here. I mean, it just so happens that he was from the same place that I grew up. So that made it an easier move. And I began kind of working for him as a pseudo apprentice, if you will, an intern, just because I wanted to learn what it would take to be able to work on my craft, to have the opportunity to train NBA players. So, I still, follow that mold today. Anytime there's an area of my life that I want to increase my skill set and my mindset and my acumen, I look for folks that have blazed that path and I try to learn from them.
Totally.
I don't try to copy them. I don't try to be them, but I try to learn from them and figure out, follow some of the breadcrumbs that they've dropped and figure out the things that worked for them, but also be very keen to the things that did not work well for them. So hopefully I can avoid some of those landmines.
For sure. One of the sayings that I've always kind of gone by when it right along with what you're saying is, find a mentor and model them, right? It doesn't mean copy them, but model them. And so if I want to become, the best NBA player in the world, I guess I better probably look at the best NBA players. First of all, if I have the skill, which I'm not even in the ballpark of, but but what are they doing, right? I mean, assuming I do have the natural God-given skill, then what are the actual habits and rituals and routines that they're doing? How do I blend that into mine? And then how do I probably take it up a notch? I'm curious, when you guys say performance coach, what exactly does that mean? Like if you're coaching a guy, and I know we're going to get to how you got involved with guys like Kevin Durant and Kobe and stuff, but what does that mean? Because is it mindset? Is it hey, you've got blinders over here and you should be over here? What is it? Or is it specific to basketball? And hey, you're I'm watching film on you and I'm noticing on defense you're not getting back quick enough, and that's how. What exactly is it?
So in the sport of basketball, it basically covers everything except for the actual skill work and X's and O's. So it was
Okay.
never my job to teach players how to dribble or how to shoot, or to teach them how to run a pick and roll, or to tell them
Right.
what defense to run. Really, it fell under two umbrellas. First was to improve their physicality, to improve their on-court athleticism, to bulletproof their body to make them resilient to injury, and to help them run faster, jump higher, be more explosive, and to be in tip-top shape, not only through an entire game, but through an entire season. The other half of that was also the mindset, the ability to have grit and resilience, the ability to stay in the present moment, the ability to stay focused, especially during times of chaos and adversity. So when I first started in the early 2000s, my title was strength and conditioning coach. And that's a little bit more self-explanatory. But as the industry started to evolve, and I'd like to believe as I evolved as well, I realized that my responsibilities far exceeded just getting someone stronger and in good shape. Those were two pillars, but that didn't cover everything. So that's kind of when many people in the industry started to call it a performance coach. And my job was to basically be the foundation to what the coaches and the trainers would do with the players. You know, if a player was fairly resilient to injury and could run fast and jump high and had mental toughness, then they would be able to apply the skills of the game at a much higher level. And the cool part is I still consider myself a performance coach, even in the corporate space, you know, through writing and keynote speeches, because ultimately it's the same thing. It's not my job to help a business with the X's and O's of their business. You know, I'm not looking at profit and loss sheets, and I'm not here to teach someone a sales funnel. My job is to make sure that everyone on the team shows up as the best version of themselves, prepared to make a maximum contribution and to play nicely with others, so that when they apply those things, they're able to do it at a higher level. So really my role hasn't changed when I switched careers. What's changed is my audience. And instead of working with basketball players on the court, I'm now working with executives and sales professionals and folks in HR, you know, in the boardroom, if you will.
So I'm guessing out of the big names we talked about, just based on where you were geographically, was Kevin Durant kind of the first guy on that list that you bumped into?
He wasn't the first, but he was absolutely the most notable. So I had a chance to work with a whole variety of different players, but Kevin's the one that I referenced the most, because I got to meet Kevin when he was 15 and started working with him as a junior in high school. And, you know, have been so proud of the way that he's developed and matured on and off the court, you know, over the last 15 plus years. But so most of my work, especially here in the DC area, was at the high school level. And that was by choice. You know, I felt that I could make a bigger impact on the lives of kids that were 15, 16, 17 years old. And I got opportunities to do some work with Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball. And that's how I was able to work the skills academies with guys like Kobe and LeBron and so forth. But most of my work and most of my focus by choice was at the high school level, and absolutely loved every minute of that. But after doing it for almost 20 years, I started to approach burnout. I started to have fascination and curiosity in areas outside of what I was doing with those players. You know, I was no longer as fascinated by, you know, sets and reps and new exercises. I was much more interested in new communication techniques and leadership and accountability and culture and the things that I do now. So the reason that I left that world in 2017 to pursue what I'm doing now as a full-time keynote speaker was because I was approaching burnout, and I knew that my point of intersection, my strength zone, needed to change.
Yeah, smart. Kind of took your own advice, right? And looked at it. Is that when you wrote Raise Your Game? Was that 2017?
I started writing it in 2018. It came out in 2019. So after I had about a year of speaking under my belt, I decided to write Raise Your Game. And I did it for a few reasons. The first is, once I graduated from college, I became a voracious reader. I never really enjoyed reading when I was in school. And looking back, I realized that's because other people forced me to read what they wanted me to read, and I had very little interest in it. As soon as I graduated and I was like, well, now no one's making me read anything, I can choose what I want to read. I was heavily attracted to, I guess, what we'd call the personal development or self-help space, you know, leadership books. You know, I was devouring books, and I have such a strong respect and reverence for authors and for books. Very early in my career, I kind of put that on my bucket list of something I'd like to do one day, would be to write a book. So when I made this pivot and I realized I had so many different strategies and approaches and mindsets and disciplines and routines that I learned from the basketball world, and I wanted to share them with the corporate world, I figured one of the best ways to do that was writing a book. And thankfully, just the mere process of writing a book caused me to really get super organized and focus on my message, on my material, on the actionable takeaways that I want folks to implement. So writing the book made me a much better speaker because it got me much clearer on my actual message of what I was trying to deliver. And really, that's what I consider my work to be today, is to help folks work to become the best versions of themselves individually so that they can make a maximum contribution to their team and their organization. And, I learned so many things through the game of basketball that can help people do that. I try to translate those messages in all of the work that I do today.
Yeah, and it is very transferable. But I'm curious, like when you went to write the book and when you were first, or I guess before you even wrote the book, but you were kind of transferring out of the basketball world and into the corporate world, was your mindset one of, hey, I definitely know that I've learned enough about leadership that it's going to be transferable, or was it, I think it might be, like, let me see if what I've learned, like, did you feel a lot of confidence walking into it, or did you feel, because it sounds like you knew, like we were saying, what you were really good at, but you weren't in necessarily the right vehicle anymore. You had sort of run that out a little bit. So it was like, okay, how can I take this thing that I'm good at, or my zone of genius, and really get into an area that makes me feel that passion again, like you did early on with basketball? Did you kind of know it would work, or how did you feel in that moment?
I had a hunch, but
Yeah.
I needed to get full confirmation. So before I left the industry that I'd been in for 20 years and that had been so good to me, I reached out to about a dozen friends of mine from different walks of life, but that all worked in the corporate world. And this was in a variety of different capacities. I mean, a couple of them were CEOs of small startups. A couple of them were higher execs at bigger companies. A couple of them were much lower on the org chart. But I reached out to them and said, can you kind of give me the Cliff Notes version of what your biggest pain points are for you individually and for your team? Like, what are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest opportunities for growth? Where do you all need help? And it was just kind of an open-ended question. And thankfully, they were all very transparent and incredibly supportive, and wrote me back pages and pages explaining that stuff. And as I was sifting through it, the overwhelming majority of the things that they thought they needed help with were the things that I had learned through the game of basketball. So it confirmed my hunch. There was a match. There was a need for what it was that I had to share. So I didn't just go run and jump into the pool and realize there was no water in it.
Totally.
I had a hunch. And then I reached out to get confirmation. And then once they started saying, lacking leadership and dysfunctional communication, and we have issues with culture, and our team doesn't hold people accountable very well, and we have very inefficient team meetings, and the sales team doesn't talk to the folks in research and development. We're very siloed. When they started sharing those pain points, then I felt very confident that this would be the right path, that there was a need for the message that I was able to share. And at that point, I basically took what it was that they shared, did a massive brain dump, and collected and curated and organized all of the notes that I'd taken through my basketball career, because I'm a very avid note taker. And then I started to mesh the two together and say, okay, there's a need. And, to take it one step further, I knew that I needed some experience getting reps as a speaker. Now, I was doing speaking when I was in the basketball world, but I was speaking to coaches on how to train their players more efficiently. So I was very comfortable being in front of people and public speaking, if you will, because I know that's a common fear for most people. It was something I was very comfortable with. But now I had a brand new message and new content and new material. So I needed to get some practice. So I really reached out to those same groups and asked if I could come speak to not their whole company, but just a portion of your team. Can we do a lunch and learn with 20 members of your sales team? Because I knew I needed to get some reps in practicing this new pursuit, and practicing and seeing what would work and what wouldn't, what stories resonated, what didn't, and get better at that. So I've been very systematic and methodical and progressive in kind of this new pursuit. And, I started in 2017. That was my first year as a full-time speaker. We're in 2023, obviously. So I'm going into year 6, and it's been an amazing learning experience. I'm still very much learning. I still very much consider myself a rookie in the corporate speaking space, but boy, has it been so much fun. And, I can look back on the last 6 years and say they've been some of the most fulfilling of my entire professional career.
Very cool. What are, from some of the guys in your background, some of the athletes that you've helped, I'm going to just pick one, and then What about Kobe Bryant for you is something you could, what are a couple of the top things, I guess, that you would take from Kobe Bryant and use maybe in a leadership capacity? Was it his competitiveness? What is his desire to be number one? Like, what are some of the lessons you personally taken from Kobe Bryant from your relationship with him?
Well, there's three that jump out immediately, and the first of those three I learned directly from Kobe. And I said that finding your strength zone was the best piece of advice I've ever been given.
Yeah.
If that's 1A, this piece of advice from Kobe is probably 1B. But the cool part about the three things I'm about to share with you is they're not unique to just Kobe. I've actually found that high performers in basketball or business or anything in between almost always share these same three. And the first is, and it's the lesson Kobe taught me, he said, the best never get bored with the basics. In essence, the best are always working towards mastery of and refining the fundamentals. Now, the fundamentals of being an elite level basketball player and the fundamentals of being a CEO or a sales professional are slightly different. So it's up to each person to figure out what are the fundamentals or the basics that I need to work towards mastery of to excel in this. I'll even take it one step further, because these lessons not only apply professionally, but they apply personally, and they not only apply individually, they apply organizationally. So if someone listening to this, if you want to have a thriving, fulfilling marriage, figure out what are the basic building blocks of having an intimate relationship and work towards mastery of those. For me, anytime I find that I'm not performing at the level that I believe I'm capable of, I do some reflection and some introspection, and I find that I've unconsciously usually started to drift away from the basics, and I need to dial that back in and work towards mastery of the fundamentals. Same thing with speaking. When I break down speaking to its essence and what it takes to not only be good on stage, but to make sure my message is memorable and sticky, and to run a successful speaking business, I'm constantly refining and working towards mastery of those fundamentals. So number one is never get bored with the basics and constantly work towards leveling up the fundamentals in your chosen pursuit. The second is high performers like Kobe have learned how to masterfully blend confidence with humility. They've earned the right to be confident. And these high performers have some of the most swagger of anybody on earth, because they've put in the work during the unseen hours. They've gotten in the repetitions. They deserve the right to be confident, but they always blend that with humility, which is what leaves them open to being coached, is what leaves them open to feedback, and what reminds them that no matter how good they get, they know they can still get better. High performers never feel like they reach their potential, never feel like they've hit the ceiling, never feel like they've arrived. They're able to have confidence and say, yeah, I'm a pretty bad dude when I'm on the court, but I'm not as good as I'm capable of becoming. And, when you look at that spectrum, if you have all confidence and no humility, you become arrogant, you become narcissistic, you close yourself off to opportunities of growth and opportunities to learn. If you have no confidence and all humility, then you probably don't have that competitiveness or that killer instinct to continue to grow and develop. You're somewhat soft, if you will. So it's really important to blend those two things together. And then the third thing that I've seen unite high performers is they have a strong respect for the process. They're crystal clear on their goal or their dream or their North Star. And they will pursue that relentlessly, but they understand that it's the process that will greatly increase the chance that they reach that goal. So they figure out what it is that they want most, and then they figure out what they need to do in the moment to give them the best chance to progressively reach that. So, underneath process, they pay a lot of attention to their habits, to disciplined decision-making, to their mindset, to the people that they spend time with. They ask themselves, if this is my goal, what am I going to do today that's going to inch me a little bit closer to that goal? So, when you look at don't get bored with the basics, blending confidence and humility, and learning how to really respect and engage with the process, you do those three things consistently, and I can promise you, you will see your performance, your achievement, and your fulfillment continue to escalate.
Oh man, you said so many things in there that were great. One that I noted down here. So even when you mentioned relationships, Alan, so like there's a Tony Robbins quote where he says, if you did what you did at the beginning of the relationship, what you should have been doing at the end of the relationship, you'd probably still be in the relationship. And I think I'm hacking his quote a little bit, but it's sort of like at the beginning of a relationship, we're all goo-goo eyes, we're opening doors, we're going out of our way to be respectful to one another. We're like, and then after a while, you're like, yeah, that's the old lady or the old man or whatever it is, right? And it's sort of like we take it for granted. In basketball, obviously, that's shooting free throws, that's staying late, that's doing wind sprints, that's whatever it is. For a sales rep, that's making phone calls, setting appointments, getting referrals, right? And then at a higher level, well, let's say you're the chief revenue officer. If you're running an entire organization that's great at making phone calls, great at setting appointments, great at follow-up, great at getting referrals, that whole organization is going to win, right? On a larger level.
And everything you're describing right now is the basics. And I love that, we can tug on both of those examples, because I think they'll apply to most of the people listening. The one with the relationship. In the beginning of most relationships, we're all heavily focused on the basics, which is being present, which is listening, which is opening doors, which is leaving notes of affection, which is bringing flowers. We're heavily invested in the basics. And then, and I'm not saying this in judgment, because I've been guilty of this in numerous relationships, we start to fade away from them. We start to take them for granted, which is the same as a basketball player saying, I don't need to work on my footwork or my layups. I got that. Let me start working on some fancy moves and chucking up 3-pointers. That's going to be to your own demise. And same thing with the sales professionals. Like, if you understand, and this is also goes in line with the process, if your goal is to sell 100 of something over the course of a year, an elite sales professional will say, all right, well, then how many do I need to average each month? All right, so my goal is to get this many sales per month. And they'll also be able to figure out, how many calls do I need to make to set a certain number of appointments to lead to that many sales. Then it just becomes a numbers game. If every 100 calls you make leads to 30 appointments, and every 30 appointments leads to 5 sales, then you can just extrapolate that and do the math and say, if I need to sell 100 of these, then I need to be making this many calls. And, they get that and they understand that. And they also approach those calls not as if they're just a number. They're not saying to themselves, oh, this is call 77 today. The elite say, this is call 1 of 1 today. This is the only call in the world that matters. The 76 that happened before this do not matter, and the ones that will happen after this do not matter. I'm putting all of my heart, soul, and love into this one call. So it's like the basketball player. Very average basketball players go out to the court to take 500 shots a day. Good basketball players go out to make 500 shots a day. Elite basketball players go out to make one shot 500 separate times. And that is not verbal semantics. There's an actual difference in the way that you approach that. If you're just shooting the ball because you got to shoot 499 more of them after this, you're not going to give it the focus or the intensity or the effort or have the precision that you will if you say, this is the only shot I'm going to take today. Take that shot, have perfect form and footwork, and then wipe the slate clean and do that again and repeat that 500 times.
Oh, I dig it. That's so good. That is really, really good. And I'm in a business. My main business is talent acquisition. Where the Leaders Lab does leadership talent acquisition. So we source over 4,000 candidates a month. So this is a very numbers driven company, where how many does it take to get so many on the phone, to get somebody submitted, to get somebody placed? And I'm guessing within our own process that we can take a look and go, can we really focus on every one of these, like you're saying, as if instead of it just being 1 in 500, it's 1 in 1. I love that. I'm curious. So I listened to you on another podcast this week. It was an older podcast from a few months ago. And I had a follow-up question that I wanted to ask you. So when I see guys like Kobe, Michael Jordan, Durant to some extent, certainly LeBron, these guys that are, the pinnacle of their sport, but also the pinnacle, I would say, of almost, the word ruthless might sound a little bit, but in terms of a competitor, I feel like you're coming into their world and no matter how alpha male you think you are, I think I especially say that of Jordan, right? I mean, he's pretty clear. If you're going to play him at ping pong, he's going to die trying to beat you. would you think those guys could translate into, how were they first of all in a team environment, the guys that you've worked with? How do you manage that in a team environment? You're a performance coach, part of, I'm sure, helping them is helping them make the other players around them better, right? And what's the mindset and the leadership needed from them? So let's just kind of start there, like with a Kobe, just known to be one of the toughest competitors, hardest workers of all time, but also a guy that I'm imagining that if you come in with a high degree of talent, Kobe's probably going to let you know it's his team, either directly or indirectly, I would think. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And the alphas that you just mentioned, that's a framework that works really well for them. And I think what's important, especially for anyone listening to this or watching this, is that doesn't mean it's a framework that's going to work for you. Those guys, their goal was to be the best compared to everybody else. For me personally, that is not my goal. My goal is to be my best. And if other people want to make comparisons, hey, that's fine. They can do whatever they want. But I don't get any motivation or have any desire to be better than any other keynote speaker out there. That does very little for me. What jives me up is knowing that I'm the best keynote speaker that I'm capable of becoming. And there's a difference there. And I don't think one is right and one is wrong. I don't think one is good and one is bad. I just think that everybody needs to figure out, where do you derive your motivation and your inspiration, and how do you measure your own success? See, the trap, and I use that word cautiously, but the trap with being the best is that means anytime you're not, then you feel less than. Anytime you don't win the NBA championship, it's championship or bust for those guys. And that's still, if that works for them, that's great. For me, because I'm so process oriented, I try to untether from outcomes. I try not to worry about that. I don't judge whether or not my keynote went well by whether or not I get a standing ovation. If I get one, that's just a nice cherry on top. But mine's much more internal. Can I look in the mirror and with some accuracy and some high self-awareness, can I say that I was fully prepared, that I turned over every stone with my due diligence, that I rehearsed incessantly, that I created a customized message, that I was, physically, mentally, and emotionally present and all in to be in service of the audience? Did I do my thing on stage to the best of my ability? And if I can check all of those boxes, then I consider that a successful keynote. Now, of course, I'm there in service of others. So I would never want to make it sound like, that I don't want to know that it hit the mark. And of course, I love applause. I love standing ovations. I love getting great evaluations. I love when people come up after and say, that really helped me. But I don't give my power to those things. Right. I look inside on whether or not I'm doing the best that I can. And, going back to those kind of alphas, the best thing to do as a coach is to remind them that because basketball is a team sport, that their greatness and their legacy and their ability to win a championship is not just in what they can do, but it's in what they can get others to do as well. So it's one thing to have scoring titles and make all-star games, but if your goal is really and truly to win NBA championships, then it's also a matter of how well you can get your teammates to play, how much you can support and challenge and push and empower them. Can you be the type of teammate that you want to play with? And, that is hard to do. I mean, by all means. I mean, I think we even saw, in some of the episodes and behind the scenes with The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, even to his own admission, there were times where he probably didn't do that part as well because he was so focused on his own pursuits and his own greatness. And you're talking about arguably the greatest player to ever play the game. So all of this stuff I'm sharing is basic in premise. But none of this stuff is easy to do. And I certainly want to make the disclaimer just to provide even more clarity. I haven't mastered any of this stuff. Everything I share on stage and everything I share on page is not coming from a place of mastery. Now, what I can say with a huge smile is it is coming from a place of progress. And I've gotten better in each of these areas and everything that we've been discussing. And I'm moving in the right direction. And I'm proud of the progress I've made. And I'm excited and optimistic about the progress that's still forthcoming. But I haven't mastered any of this. When I'm on stage, I am not a guru to tell people I've got this figured out. I'm someone there with some vulnerability and some empathy saying, let me share some things that have worked. Let me even share with you a few things that haven't worked. And now it's up to you to take them and apply them to your own life.
Totally. I think, for all of us that are in growth mode, which is hopefully all of us, right? That it's the progress, it's the pursuit, right? It's knowing, I mean, that to me is like the secret weapon. It's almost like if someone says, I'm going to be where you are in a year, and it's like, well, I won't be here anymore. I'm going to be doing something else, right? And it's really interesting with what we described about the competitive nature, and almost that mindset of sometimes for me to win, you have to lose. Like if I have to be the best, it means you have to be second best or worst.
Right.
And again, I want that guy on my team. And certainly if I'm a fan, I want that guy on my team, right? I'm like, that's the guy that's going to win. Personally, I think that's got to be a very hard burden to live with, either as a teammate or as the holder of that emotion, because all of everything is looking over your shoulder, and it's also always dependent upon other people's results. What you described in your own fulfillment is it's based on you. You're the judge and the jury. You know what you came there to do. You're not waiting for outside critics. You're not waiting for Facebook likes. You're not even necessarily, you'll like the response, but it's not going to be the end determiner of how you feel about that, because you know where you're at in your own development, and you know what you came there to do. And so I think for most people, that's probably a much more fulfilling kind of mindset to follow, right? Is to perform to our own standards, not to the external.
Absolutely. That is so insightful and right on. And, ultimately what you're saying is if your measuring stick has to do with everybody else,
Yeah.
those things are outside of your control. So in essence, and perfect example, LeBron James is a once in a century type of athlete. He is remarkable by every single metric there is. And even he can't escape being compared to Michael Jordan and people saying, well, you're not the best. Michael Jordan was better. So does that mean LeBron should feel bad about his career or his legacy or his performance? I would hope not. Now if he has some drive and some competitiveness to be better than MJ, that's fine. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. But I would hope that he can still find solace and fulfillment in what it is that he's been able to do. So I also want to make it clear that I am hyper competitive. I'm just hyper competitive with myself. I mean,
Right.
basically my goal for 2023 is to be a better version of myself than I was in 2022, and I want my progress to be incremental. I want it to be progressive. I want it to be systematic. To me, I'm at a point in my life where, I'm probably not going to make giant cavernous leaps of improvement. I'm going to make minor refinements and minor tweaks, and I'm going to tighten the screws and refocus the lens. But for this calendar year, can I have slightly better habits than I had last year? Can I make slightly better decisions than I made last year? Can I have slightly more connected relationships than I had last year? And even if I'm only getting better 1 or 2% in 4 or 5 different areas, if I can do that every single year from 47 to number 100, that's going to be unbelievable growth. So for me, I'm never stagnant. I'm very competitive, but I'm just competitive with what I did yesterday or what I did last year or the person that I used to become. And I love that because that puts all of the control back to me, and I don't have to worry what others are doing. I still pay attention to what others are doing. I've got a variety of friends that are amazing keynote speakers, and I learn from them. We have some good jam sessions and masterminds, and but I'm also rooting for them. I'm not thinking to myself that in order for me to be a successful keynote speaker, that you have to be an unsuccessful one. That's kind of a scarcity mindset, which honestly is one that I was programmed with when I was younger. I'm really trying to rewire myself to have an abundance mindset, that I can be unbelievably successful, high performing, and fulfilled. And so can you. It's not me versus you. It's you and me. And in fact, I can actually help with that. And the quote that I remind myself of that, because let's be honest, I'm human, I'm fallible, I'm flawed. I have moments of selfishness. I have moments of jealousy. I have moments where I'm not in perfect alignment with everything that I'm sharing with you right now. But thankfully, I have an awareness to catch myself. And the phrase that I use to remind myself is a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And I remember that my light is not going to shine any dimmer by me helping you or empowering you or connecting you with someone or recommending you for something. All that's going to do is add to my strength. And for most of my life, I had a lot of trouble with that. For most of
Right.
my life, I looked at things as zero sum, that in order for me to win, you have to lose. And it didn't leave me with a very high sense of fulfillment. It left me feeling very empty. And I'm really trying to rewire myself to have this abundance mindset and to try to light as many candles as I can.
I'm totally with you on that. I love that whole thing. And not only with you on it, but I feel like experience the same thing. And I think there's a lot of guys our age that maybe grew up right with, that is the definition of winning and losing. I win, you lose, that kind of thing. And then you discover through business and other walks of life that it's not necessarily leading to happiness, and that scarcity mindset bleeds into other areas of your life, right? It's like, if you make the money, you're taking away from me somehow, or if you're getting the love, I'm not getting it somehow, or if you're winning the game, I can't also win somehow. And so it's it's a chase that would be nice to, and I think it's probably why you do what you do and I do what I do, is that it be nice to just tell people, look, there's a shortcut. Like, maybe you'll have to go through this sort of, in order for me to win, you got to lose mindset a little bit, but maybe if you could solve it in your 20s instead of your 40s, that would mean that we're doing our jobs, right? And so um what else? So in terms of just to close out here, and I can't believe we've been on this long already. It's
It
so
flew
great to
by.
talk
It's
with
been
you.
so much fun, man. This has been awesome.
Thank you, brother. Talk to me a little bit. So when people are engaging with you to bring them on for corporate gigs, and so are you also doing training or mostly keynote speeches for like their events and that kind of thing? What is the way that people use you the most, and how can they find you to get that done?
So I have three different offerings. I have a keynote, which would be something anywhere from 30 minutes to 90 minutes. And,
Yeah.
and for the most part, a keynote, although I do my due diligence, I have a pre-event call, I learn everything I can about the organization and who's going to be in the audience. A keynote by design is fairly one directional. It is, I've done all of my homework to make sure that this hits the target, and now I'm going to share it with you in kind of a performance, if you will. I also do a half-day interactive workshop, and that has basically the same premise as the keynote, but now we're able to unpack it, and it's much more multi-directional. It's not me speaking with you, it's us speaking together, and you guys doing some breakouts with some partners or small groups. It's debriefing, it's you asking questions, it's me kind of being the conductor of the orchestra, not me just up there playing the violin by myself. And I do half-day workshops and I do full-day trainings. So all of them are viable options. Most groups tend to bring me in for keynotes at present, but I'm starting to see folks have a higher interest in the interactive and longer forms,
Yeah.
so that they can get more bang for their buck. And what I've also noticed, a nice trend, which I think was birthed out of the pandemic, is a lot of groups are hiring me for a keynote, and I come in person and I do my thing, and then they're bringing me back 30, 60, and 90 days later for some follow-up virtual engagements where I can reinforce the message. The way I look at a keynote, it's my job to plant some seeds and to get people thinking differently, and most importantly, behaving differently. And then when they bring me back 30, 60, 90 days later, I'm able to hold them accountable and reinforce and emphasize the seeds I planted to see if we're actually making progress. Because to me, ultimately, the success of one of my presentations or one of my workshops is not how people feel when it's over. It's, did their behavior change in the days, weeks, and months following it?
Sure.
And when I get a CEO send me an email 30 days later saying, we have made a radical improvement, in our interdepartment communication, or, and using some of the verbiage from my keynote, then I know that it actually hit the mark. And to me, that's what's most important. And while most of the world has shifted back to doing this stuff in person, about 10% of what I do is still virtual, where groups will have me speak or do some type of workshop or training virtually. But I'm having a blast. I'm loving it. If anyone watching or listening thinks this could be a good fit and you want to explore it further, just go to alansteinjr.com. You can click the contact button and fill out that form. My team and I would love to see if this would be the right fit. I'm also at Alan Stein Jr. On Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Feel free to follow those channels as I try to put out content pretty regularly. And I also put out out a weekly YouTube video and a weekly podcast. So there's no shortage of stuff that if you enjoyed this conversation, and I sure know I did, that we just had, folks, if you want to hear some more, just follow on any of those channels, and I'd be truly honored.
So cool, Alan. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll make sure to put your contact info in our show notes as well. And, such a pleasure to meet you. And I hope our paths continue to cross. I'm sure they will.
I sure hope they do too, man. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right. Take care.